It's been 100 years since the men and women of Sligo went away to fight in the First World War. And the list is growing since the beginning of the News from the Past exhibition, which is taking place in the Sligo County Museum. We're going to go inside and speak to some of the family members. We're going to speak to the people who are organising the exhibition and see the memorabilia that has been left behind. Thank you very much for having us here today at the News from the Past exhibition. How did this come about?
Well, the project has been funded by the EU through the Peace 3 programme, managed by Sligo County Council on behalf of the Sligo Peace and Reconciliation Partnership Committee. And the aim of the project is to commemorate the people from Sligo who were caught up in World War I. And the background to the project would be the fact that we're 100 years on from the start of the war in 1914. Ireland was a very different place then, as you know. We're very much part of the British Empire. And when people went off to fight in the war from Sligo, they did so believing that it was for economic purposes, or it was maybe a family tradition, or maybe the church had encouraged them to do so, as happened at the time. But when they came back, Ireland was a very different place. 1916 had happened, attitudes had changed, and the people that came back after the war basically put away their uniforms, their medals, and they never spoke about it again. So the idea was, 100 years on, it's time to commemorate these people. First phase of the project, News from the Past, was launched at the beginning of May. And what we did was we launched a website, newsfromthepast.ie. We called for the families of the people who died in the war to come into us with memorabilia. So for the first time, we published a list. Brian Scanlon put the list together. He researched it for 15, 20 years, and unless that he could prove that they died in the war, they didn't go on the list. So we published the list on the website, and we let people go and research their ancestors. And then we got so much memorabilia that came back and to enable us to put this exhibition together. It was just amazing.
And did many people come that you had never heard of before?
Literally, we had a man who came in off the street with a really interesting story to tell from his great-granduncle who died in the war and fought as part of the Canadian Army. So it just was amazing. And even since the exhibition opened last week, there's more and more stuff coming. So I expect that we'll be adding to the exhibition the whole time.
People kept some of the stuff at home, so you have some fantastic things here to show that came out of people's attics.
Correct, from literally all sorts of places. There was one particular piece that came in on the opening night of the exhibition. A lot of places had rolls of honour, and we have a beautiful one inside from the Henry Lyons shop. But I heard of another one from the Sligo Mills, and that's where the Glasshouse Hotel is now. And we'd heard that there was a roll of honour that was on display, and it was also part of the Ballisadair Mill. But the roll of honour had gone missing. So I got contacted about 2 days before the exhibition opened to say it had been found. Would I like it? Lo and behold, the night of the opening, I'm up there making the speech. This guy walks in with a big black bag, and in it was the roll of honour. It's the first time it's been seen. It's been hidden away for over 60 years. It's up on the wall now beside the Henry Lyons one. We have a lovely collection of glass negatives. This is from the Kilgannon Studios. The Kilgannon Studios was a very prolific studio here in Sligo. And all the photographs they would have taken were obviously pre-digital, so they were on glass negative. This is pre-film as well. The studio went out of business some years ago, and all the glass negatives were dumped in the town dump in Finnislin. And thankfully, a guy came along, found the glass negatives, and every night he would bring 10 of them home. And the reason he brought 10 of them home is they're actually very heavy, and he couldn't carry more. So he recovered about 3,000 of them. Now they've been digitised and they're here available in the county library. But these are original images from Sligo. They do have coding at the top, but we don't know what the record of the coding is. So we can't be sure whether they're Joe Bloggs or Fred Bloggs or Harry Bloggs. But we're hoping that somebody might walk in and say, hey, that's my granddad, or that's my great-granduncle, and it'd be great. But that's an example of piece that has literally come from a dump, as opposed to coming from the attic.
And some of them are the clothes that they would have worn in the war, which have stood the test of time.
Yeah, this is an original Burberry jacket. It doesn't have the Burberry pattern that everybody knows, but it's an original waxed jacket that an officer would have worn. It's the white officer's jacket. The other thing which is also on display is an original ammunition jerkin. This is an incredibly rare piece. What the artillery would have worn is around their shoulders. There's a buckle on the front which you tie up, and down the sides are two big pockets. In those pockets you would put two huge rounds of artillery ammunition, and their handles, and you would pick it up and you would run very quickly from the ammunition truck to the artillery. We also have an original German Packenbau Prussian officer's leather helmet. This is the real deal. It was taken off the battlefield of Verdun. It's very, very rare. It's actually a leather helmet, so it would have served absolutely no protection whatsoever from shrapnel or anything like that.
One of the interesting things about this exhibition is that we're hearing now for the first time about Captain Ritty. What happened to him?
Captain Ritty was a local man. He was born down by the harbour. We read about some of his deeds that he did. We read about the fact that he was gassed in the trenches, that he came home, that he recuperated. He went back to the war a couple of months later, was involved in a big skirmish of which he did incredible things, and then he disappeared. He's one of the missing from the war. He got awarded the military cross. So I'm working at an antique fair up in the Clarion Hotel where I'm talking to people about this, and lo and behold, the guy beside me comes forward and says, are you interested in this? And he produces Captain Ritty's military cross. Not only that, but he produces his campaign medals, his plaque, which is sometimes known as the dead man's penny, plus a photograph of him. So suddenly we had the full story of Captain Ritty came forward.
You were one of the first people who had accumulated a list in Sligo. This is the list that you have here, the Roll of Honour. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, this was done to celebrate the people who'd gone to fight in the First World War, as they called the Great War. And there was 34 people went, of which 8 didn't come home.
Richard, in 1917, when you had the Roll of Honour on display, it would have been somewhat unusual to have done that in those times. And why do you think your grandfather decided to do that?
Well, I think he was very proud of the people who had worked for him and their bravery, and he wanted to celebrate it. And also, it was effectively a family, because 34 people had gone to war out of 80 male workers. And so he was proud of them, and he wanted to show his pride. And those that came back, only 8 were killed, so there was 20 odd got home. 100 years later, we're still proud of them.
Both your grandparents went away?
Yes. My mother's father was in the Flying Corps. He was an artillery officer, and he won the Military Cross twice, which is just below the Victoria Cross. And my grandmother was an ambulance driver in the First World War. And I have to tell you a funny story, which I'll tell you now, is that they organised their leave at the same time. And he collected her and flew her down in a biplane down to Paris. And they went to see Maurice Chevalier in the theatre in Paris in the middle of the war. And years later, when my grandmother was a very old lady, there was Gigi was on the television, and I was sitting with a small boy beside her. Oh, I remember him. I saw him when he was a young man, singing in Paris.
Oh,
so you know, so they had lighter moments even in the middle of the hell.
And Hilary, you are the next generation, yep. So it would have been your great-grandparents.
Yep. Yep.
And what sparked the interest for you?
Well, what sparked the interest was I wanted to find out about my dad's father, because he died when my dad was young as well, so I didn't know a lot about him. So I went up to the Enniskillen Fusiliers and got information about him, and then he had more information about all the rest of my family that had gone to fight. So it was just, I wanted to build up a family tree, so it was just starting to get more and more information, and more relatives started to come out of the woodwork and was telling me different stories about fighting in Gallipoli and moving fighting in Gallipoli, surviving, and then going off to fight was
in the Somme.
In the Somme as well, and they died in the Somme a couple of years later. But it's just incredible that they went and they fought. Like I can't see any of my generation doing that at all.
Seamus, you have a victory medal. Can you tell me how you acquired that?
I was born and reared in the village of Ballintoher, and in the middle 50s my father purchased a small bit of land in the townland of La Valley. Being a small child, I remember them taking down the thatch of the old house which was ready to fall, and in the process my father said to some of the men to search in there that there was a medal belonging to the man that was born and reared in the house, and it could possibly be in the house. That's all that ever happened about that until about 10 years ago I started thinking about this medal. I went to my local pub one night for a drink, and through conversation a man asked me where I was from, told him. He said that he had been in a pub in Boyle, and a man asked him did he know any Kerrigans from La Valley, Ballintoher. The only one that he knew from that area was me. And the man that owned the pub is Jerry Mattimo, and that he had the medal belonging to a John Kerrigan. So I called to Jerry Mattimo on numerous occasions to see would he either sell me the medal or give me the medal. So after several calls, Jerry agreed to sell me the medal. Unusual that almost 100 years later, I own the bit of land where the man was born and reared, and I have his medal back in my possession.
And do you have any idea what his war story was?
The story was that he told his father that he was going off to fight in the war. When he was going out the door, the story is that his father told him, he said, "You're going off to fight in the war." "I am." He said, "Will you pull the door after you?" Meaning to close the door. And the son gave his father a kind of a sarcastic answer and said, "Where I'm going, it's an awful distance to pull a door after me."
And did John Kerrigan survive the war?
No, John Kerrigan was killed in the war and he's buried in Belgium. And there's a graveyard there. All the names are up on white crosses of all the soldiers that were killed and where they're buried, and their names are on them.
And you have that medal on display here
I have
today?
that medal, yes, I have that medal, and I will keep that medal and hold on to that medal because it's history back in a Kerrigan name after almost 100 years.
They were very interesting stories from our past. Anyone interested in the exhibition, it is in the Sligo County Museum until September. Thanks to all the team there and also at Ellabone Restaurant. I'm afraid that's all we have time for this week. Join us next week for more stories from Sligo, Sloan, August Bannock.